Today I want to talk about Passover with regards to the plagues, and in thinking in terms of these plagues, that they were judgments of God. That we talk about plagues, but the biblical text calls them also judgments. It also calls them wonders, um, which is fascinating as you think about these plagues. Let's look at the plagues, just a couple of them, just to think through. The first plague is the water of Egypt is turned into blood. Well, why do you think God would want to turn the Nile River and all of the water sources in Egypt into blood? I suspect that it has to do with the first chapters of the book of Exodus. If you go to the first chapters, uh, verse 7 of chapter 1 says that the children of Israel were multiplying and that they were growing in number. Well, that's good because the book of Genesis had said, multiply and fill the earth. And so here's the children of Israel doing just exactly what they were told to do. Then we get to, so let's back up. How did we get to Egypt? Well, we got to Egypt through Joseph being sold into Egypt, and his brothers threw him into a pit. He was taken out of the pit, brought to Egypt, and sold to Potiphar. And then Joseph is able to interpret dreams. He's able to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh ultimately puts Joseph in charge of the bumper crop that's going to happen for 7 years, and then there's going to be famine for 7 years. Over time, Joseph's brothers have to come to Egypt to get food, and then it's there that they find out that Joseph is still alive and that he's now the second in command in Egypt. Joseph gives the land of Goshen to his family, and that becomes their inheritance property in Egypt. Everything's going fine until we get to the book of Exodus, and we find out there arose another Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. And I take it when he did not know Joseph, it doesn't mean that he didn't know about Joseph, but it means that they were not in any kind of covenant relationship. There was no official relationship that they had. Well, what happens? This Pharaoh thinks to himself, well, if Israel continues to grow as a nation, one of these days they're going to join our enemies and fight against us and destroy us. So we better destroy them first. Well, he enlists the Hebrew midwives, and he asks them to destroy the children. So he says, I want you to destroy the children. Well, they refuse to do that because it says they feared God. So then he says to his own people, here's what I want you to do. I want you to throw all the baby boys into the Nile, and they'll just die in the Nile River through either being eaten alive by an animal or just drowning. He enlists his own people to do this. So this first plague, think about what would have happened if babies had been thrown in a river. What would have happened? There would have been blood shed. So the first plague is where the Nile is turned into blood. It's as if Egypt is allowed to see what they have done to the Israelites. They're allowed to see the carnage and death that they brought upon Israel. Well, what happens? Moses' mother, Jochebed, she takes Moses and she puts him into an ark. An ark, that sounds familiar. That's Genesis 9. And she coats it just like Noah coated the ark. Same thing. And then she puts the baby in the Nile, but inside this basket, this ark. And the child is found by Pharaoh's daughter, one of Pharaoh's daughters, and she notices that this is a Hebrew child. She says he's a Hebrew child. How would she have known that he was a Hebrew child? Well, she probably uncovered him, and she said, he's circumcised. That's how I think she knew. Moses' sister, Miriam, is there. She says, let me go and get a wet nurse for you. Long and short, Moses is raised up in the palace of Pharaoh. Moses, however, ends up having to leave because he kills an Egyptian. So he ends up in Midian, marries a woman named Zipporah, and then God calls Moses. He spends 40 years in the desert, wandering the desert as a shepherd, and then God calls him. He has this burning bush experience in Exodus chapter 3. And God says to him, I want you to go back to my people, and I want you to pull them out. And the first plague that Moses does is to turn the Nile into blood. That brings us to the seventh plague. The seventh plague is a most intriguing plague for this reason. It's the longest described of all of the, I say plagues, wonders, signs, judgments. And it's fascinating because what happens is hail falls, and inside the hail is fire. Now you would think to yourself, these are two things that should never be able to coexist together. How would ice and fire coexist? Either the fire would melt the ice, or the ice would put out the fire. But here's the miracle. You have hail that falls with fire inside of it. So the seventh plague is incredible. Not only that, but in the seventh plague, Pharaoh finally admits, it's the first time he admits that he's been wrong. So at this seventh plague, he says, you know what? I was wrong. I should have let the children of Israel go. Now he still doesn't let them go. There's still 3 more wonders and 3 more signs. But it's at the seventh plague he finally says, I have sinned. But go back and look at the seventh plague. It's fascinating because here you have hail and fire that come down together. That brings me to the 10th plague. The 10th plague is the death of the firstborn. And here, like I said earlier, that Pharaoh could have put blood on his doorpost. He's warned. If you don't put blood on your doorpost, everybody must do this. You must be inside a house, or the mashkit, the death angel, will come over and pass over your house. And if there's any firstborn that's not inside a house that's covered by blood, then there will be death. It says that there was death in every house of Egypt. In Israel, there was no death because they believed and they took by faith the word of God, and they put blood on the doorpost. And so we have the Nile River turning into blood. We have hail and fire coming down together. We have the death of the firstborn. These plagues and these wonders and these judgments were designed to show God's power over the other gods. But not only that, with the turning of the Nile into blood, and with the hail falling with fire, also to see that God has control over nature, that all of nature is under his control, that he can do the miraculous inside of nature. He's not bound by nature, and that he can overcome nature. He can superimpose himself above nature. So it's fascinating. I hope you'll come and study with us on Passover and have a good time with us. We'd love to see you there. Take care and God bless.